Identifying the 10 wealthiest people of all time can be a little problematic because they lived through different periods in history with varying economies and varying approaches to measuring wealth. It can be challenging to put a dollar value on the wealth of prehistoric figures. Therefore, in looking at the 10 wealthiest people in human history, we base our analysis on the present-day value of estimated net assets as per historical record. Number 10. Elon Musk. Elon Musk, a South African-Canadian industrial designer and co-founder of Tesla, is the only man alive to make it into our top 10. He is also the founder of many other companies, including SpaceX, Neuralink, and The Boring Company. As of January 2021, according to Bloomberg's Billionaires Index, Musk is the richest man alive. His assets include a 20% ownership stake in Tesla, estimated at $141 billion, a 54% equity in SpaceX Corporation, estimated at $39 billion, and other assets and investments estimated at $17 billion, totaling an estimated net worth of $197 billion. Number 9. Osman Ali Khan. Osman Ali was a semi-autonomous ruler of the Hyderabad state in British India. He personally owned the Golconda mines, which at the time was the only supplier of diamonds in the world. He had his personal mint for printing his own currency, the Hyderabadi rupee. His coffers contained 100 million sterling pounds worth of gold and 400 million pounds worth of jewels. He appeared on the cover of Times magazine in 1937 as the richest man in the world, and that he remained until his death in 1967. In today's terms, his wealth is estimated at approximately $230 billion. Number 8. Nicolas II of Russia. Nicolas II was the Emperor of Russia from 1894 to 1917 and is famous for being one of the wealthiest monarchs in history. Nicolas's immense wealth lies in the value of the 65 million hectares of land he owned in Altai and Transbaikal, filled with gold, silver, copper, and lead mines, whose exploration generated hundreds of millions of pounds in annual revenue. Also, the imperial theaters in Moscow and St. Petersburg and many other corporations owned by the imperial family were all part of his inheritance. Most importantly, the imperial jewelry was the most valuable asset owned by Nicolas, which he deposited in large quantities with British, German, and other European banks for safekeeping. In today's terms, it is estimated that he was worth about $300 billion at the time of his death in 1917. Number 7. Basil II of the Byzantine Empire. Basil II was a 10th century emperor of Byzantium and is considered one of the greatest emperors of the Eastern Roman Empire. His constant military conquests significantly extended the empire's borders. His treasury in Constantinople was overflowing with accumulated plunder from his conquests and royalties received from conquered territories. He suppressed the feudal landlords, distributed the land to peasant farmers, and had all taxes paid directly to his treasury. At the time of his death in 1025, he had stockpiled over 200,000 talents of gold in his personal coffers. An ancient talent weighs about 34.3 kilograms. The international price of gold at the time of making this video is $55,630 per kilogram. This brings Basil's worth to approximately $381 billion. Number 6. Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was born in 1835 in Dunfermline, Scotland, and migrated to the US with his parents in 1848. In 1892, he founded the biggest iron and steel corporation in America, the Carnegie Steel Company. At the time when the US Steel Company had just become the first billion-dollar industry in the world, capitalized at $1.4 billion, Carnegie sold his company to J.P. Morgan in 1901 for $480 million. The amount represented 2.1% of US GDP, which is equivalent to $439 billion in 2020. Although his name doesn't get covered a lot in the press, Carnegie is one of the wealthiest Americans of all time. Before his passing in 1919, he donated most of his wealth to charities and spent on philanthropic projects. Number 5. John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller was an American business magnate and oil tycoon. He began investing in the oil industry in 1863 at age 24. In 1880, he founded the Standard Oil Company, which involved oil production, refining, marketing, and transportation. Standard Oil grew to become the largest oil refiner globally and controlled over 90% of America's oil production. In September 1916, Rockefeller officially became the first person ever to hit a nominal personal fortune of $1 billion. Rockefeller's net worth was valued at about $1.5 billion based on his federal tax return in 1918. That amount represented 2% of the US GDP at the time, equivalent to $418 billion in 2020. At the time of his passing in 1937, his net worth was estimated at 2.15% of US GDP, equivalent to $450 billion in 2020. Number 4. Jacob Fugger. Jacob Fugger, also known as Fugger the Rich, was a 16th century merchant, mining entrepreneur, and banker from Augsburg in present-day Germany. He was born into the wealthy Fugger family, which dominated the textile trade with Italy for many generations. However, Jacob and his brothers Ulrich and Georg diversified into banking by lending money to European royal families and the Roman Catholic Church. In 1493, Fugger began mining operations in Western Austria and the extraction of silver, copper, and cinnabar in the present-day Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Spain. By 1500, he had expanded his family business to the whole of Europe. He had almost become the sole supplier of copper on the continent. By 1507, the Emperor Maximilian I of Austria had become so indebted to Fugger that he had to surrender the lordships and associated cities of Kirchberg, Weibenhorn, Wohlenstetten, and Pfaffenhofen to Fugger for a sum of 50,000 guilders. Following the death of his brothers Georg in 1506 and Ulrich in 1510, Fugger solely managed the entire business and increased the family fortune tenfold. At the time of his death on the 30th of December 1525, Fugger's net worth was valued at 2,132,261 guilders. To understand the enormity of this amount, think of 50,000 guilders as being sufficient to pay for the lordships of 4 major Austrian cities. Then imagine how far 2 million guilders would go. The present-day value of Fugger's wealth is estimated to be over 500 billion US dollars. Number 3. King Solomon of Israel. Solomon was the ruler of the United Kingdom of Israel from the year 970 BC to the year 931 BC. He is famous for his wisdom and riches. According to the Hebrew Bible, the Kingdom of Israel attained the height of its splendor and glory during Solomon's 40-year reign. Though the Bible doesn't precisely state what Solomon was worth, it gives us several clues about his wealth's greatness. In 1 Kings chapter 10 verse 14, the Bible says Solomon received 666 talents of gold annually. An ancient talent weighs about 34.3 kilograms. The international price of gold at the time of making this video is $55,630 per kilogram. This brings Solomon's annual revenue to approximately $1.27 billion and the revenue throughout his 40-year reign to about $50.8 billion. Solomon also received annual tributes from merchants, territorial governors, and Arabian kings, who brought in several vessels of gold, silver, and purple garments, as well as spices, horses, chariots, and antiquities to please the king's eyes. The Bible says the king became so rich that all his cups were made of gold, and not even one was made of silver. His wealth was so immense that precious metals became as common in Jerusalem as stones. Based on the biblical description, we would estimate that his wealth's present-day value would be somewhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion. Number 2. Augustus Caesar. Augustus Caesar was the first emperor of ancient Rome, reigning from 27 BC until his death in 14 AD. He personally owned the whole of Egypt, and at one point, his personal wealth was equivalent to 1/5 of the entire empire's economy. At that time, the Roman Empire accounted for over 25% of the global GDP. Augustus commanded vast financial resources and took upon himself to finance building construction and road maintenance in Italy in 20 BC, a responsibility usually borne by the Senate. The main source of his wealth was the immense land rents he received from Egypt, as Egypt was considered his private property rather than a province of the empire. He also received tributes from conquered Roman provinces like Hispania, Gaul, Syria, and Cyprus. In 2019, the Times magazine estimated Augustus's net worth at $4.6 trillion. He was the only man in history to have ever surpassed King Solomon in wealth. Even after his death, it took over 1,300 years for another person to amass such an amount of wealth. Before we get to the wealthiest human ever to walk on the face of planet Earth, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Number 1. Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa, also known as Musa I of Mali, was undoubtedly the wealthiest person in human history. Musa was the 10th emperor of Mali, the most prosperous Sahelian empire in 14th century West Africa that developed along the trans-Saharan trade routes in the later parts of the medieval era. Musa annexed 24 kingdoms, stretching his empire from the shores of West Africa right to Niger, covering present-day Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, and Ivory Coast. Underneath these large landmasses lied enormous deposits of gold and salt, through which Musa made his wealth. Mali alone accounted for over half of the world's gold supply, and all of it belonged to Musa. Kathleen Berzak, who specializes in African arts at the Northwestern University, described Musa as having unlimited access to the most valued source of wealth in the medieval world. Despite its colossal amount of gold deposits, very little was known of Mali before Musa's reign. This changed after Musa's trip to Mecca. In 1324, Musa went on a pilgrimage to Mecca with 60,000 men, all wearing brocade and Persian silk, 12,000 slaves, each carrying 1.8 kilograms of gold bars, and heralds dressed in silk and bearing gold staffs, 80 camels, each carrying 136 kilograms of gold dust, and caravans of elephants heavily loaded with gold. Musa is reported to have built a mosque every Friday during his journey and shared gold with all the poor people he met on his way. Musa made a 3-month stop in Cairo, during which his massive spending and generous donations caused a sudden influx of gold, which resulted into a severe gold recession that lasted 10 years. Medina and Mecca are other cities that suffered inflation as a result of Musa's presence and witnessed a severe decline in the value of the gold. This wrecked the Egyptian economy, as Cairo was the world's leading gold market at the time. The consequences of his actions quickly became apparent. On his way back from Mecca, he made another stop in Egypt and tried to help the country's economy by borrowing some of the gold from Cairo money lenders at exorbitant interest rates, thereby reducing the amount of gold in circulation. This was the only time in history that a single person directly controlled the price of gold. It was the trip to Mecca that landed Musa and Mali on the Catalan Atlas of 1375. Musa was reported by contemporaries as being inconceivably rich. There's no way to make an estimate of his wealth, and for that we apologize. Rudolf Ware, associate professor of history at the University of Michigan, explains Musa's riches as impossible to describe. "This is the wealthiest guy the world has ever known," says Ware. "There are pictures of him holding a scepter of gold, on a throne of gold, with a crown of gold, holding a cup of gold. Imagine as much gold as anyone could possibly possess, and then double it. That's what all the accounts are trying to communicate. When no one can possibly comprehend your wealth, that means you're pretty darned rich." Surprisingly, very little is known about Musa outside of West Africa. Thank you for watching, and please do well to check out our next video right here.